The Weight of Love and Lies by UT. Francis and Jane were a pair whose love story began like any other, sweet, hopeful, and full of promise. They met in the bustling city where dreams often collided with harsh realities. Francis was a school teacher, passionate about molding young minds but perpetually struggling to make ends meet. He lived paycheck to paycheck, pouring every ounce of his energy into his work and his relationship with Jane. Jane, on the other hand, was captivating, a beautiful woman with curves that turned heads and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She had an air of confidence that drew people in, especially men. But beneath her alluring exterior lay a complexity that even she couldn't fully unravel. Jane loved Francis deeply, there was no denying that. Yet her life wasn't as simple as it appeared. Living on her own, she faced financial struggles too, though she never let Francis see them. To her, being strong meant finding ways to survive, and sometimes thrive, in a world that demanded more than either of them could afford. Their dynamic worked well enough for a while. Francis adored Jane, doing everything he could to keep her happy despite their meager resources. He cooked meals from scratch, surprised her with small gifts when he could scrape together some extra cash, and always made sure she felt cherished. In return, Jane showered him with affection, both emotionally and physically. She knew how hard Francis worked, and she genuinely appreciated his loyalty and devotion. But what Francis didn't know gnawed at the edges of their seemingly perfect bond. Jane had secrets, ones she convinced herself were harmless. Other men pursued her relentlessly, drawn by her beauty and charm. And while she claimed to be faithful to Francis, she occasionally allowed these admirers into her orbit, exchanging intimacy for money or favors. It wasn't something she took pride in, but in her mind it was practical. "I'm helping us," she told herself. "This is my way of showing love." The admiration Francis didn't see. What neither of them realized or perhaps refused to acknowledge was that Francis also had admirers. Women noticed him not just because of his boyish charm or kind smile, but because of the quiet strength he exuded. There was Sarah, a fellow teacher at his school, who often lingered after staff meetings under the guise of discussing lesson plans. She admired how dedicated Francis was, both professionally and personally. Then there was Monica, a single mother whose son was one of Francis's brightest students. She found excuses to stop by his classroom, bringing homemade cookies or coffee as thinly veiled tokens of gratitude. Francis, however, remained oblivious to their intentions, or maybe he chose to ignore them. His heart belonged to Jane, and he saw no reason to entertain anyone else. Still, the attention made him feel validated, even if only subconsciously. After long days of teaching unruly teenagers and coming home to find Jane distant or preoccupied, the warm smiles and lingering glances from other women provided a fleeting sense of reassurance. Unbeknownst to him, this admiration fueled Jane's insecurities. Though she prided herself on being desirable, seeing other women fawn over Francis stirred jealousy within her. She masked it with flirtation toward other men, convincing herself that keeping Francis on edge would remind him of what he stood to lose. What she failed to see was that her actions only pushed him further away. The breaking point. The cracks in their relationship started forming subtly, almost imperceptibly. One evening, after a long day at work, Francis sat with a close friend over drinks. His friend regaled him with tales of betrayal and deceit, stories of women who played games behind their partners' backs. At first, Francis dismissed them as mere gossip, but as the night wore on, one particular story stuck in his mind. It was about a man who discovered his partner had been using him, manipulating his trust for personal gain. That night, Francis lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The story replayed in his head, intertwining with doubts he hadn't dared to acknowledge before. Something within him shifted. Over the next few weeks he became more observant, noticing things he'd previously overlooked. Jane's sudden influx of cash, her expensive new clothes, the way certain men looked at her when they went out. A nagging suspicion grew until it consumed him. Driven by curiosity and fear, Francis decided to dig deeper. What he uncovered shattered his world. Conversations overheard, receipts found in odd places, and whispered phone calls painted a picture he couldn't ignore. Jane had been seeing other men, not just casually flirting but engaging in intimate relationships for material benefits. The worst part? Some of the money she used to help him came from those encounters. When confronted, Jane didn't deny it. Instead, she tried to explain, tears streaming down her face. "I did it for us, Francis," she pleaded. "You're always working so hard and I wanted to ease your burden. I thought you'd understand." But Francis couldn't understand. Betrayal cut deep, and the realization that Jane had been living a double life left him feeling used and humiliated. Despite her pleas, he couldn't forgive her. For him, trust was the foundation of love, and once broken, it couldn't be rebuilt. Their breakup was messy, filled with anger and hurt. Jane resented him for walking away, accusing him of ingratitude. She retaliated by spreading rumors, painting him as a failure who relied on her generosity. In turn, Francis hardened. The idealism he once held about love vanished, replaced by cynicism. He threw himself into self-improvement, determined to rise above the pain. He focused on his career, eventually becoming a respected educator and mentor. Women entered his life, including Sarah and Monica, who had waited patiently on the sidelines. While they offered companionship and comfort, Francis kept them at arm's length, unwilling to risk another heartbreak. Jane too moved on. Her looks and charisma ensured she was never short of admirers. She dated wealthy men who lavished her with gifts, though none truly understood her. Deep down she carried regret, not for what she'd done but for losing Francis. She convinced herself she had acted out of love, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had sabotaged the best thing in her life. Years passed and both found success in their respective paths. Francis became known for his dedication to education, earning accolades and respect. Jane thrived in social circles, admired for her wit and charm. Occasionally they crossed paths, at events, mutual friends' gatherings, but they never spoke. The weight of unresolved emotions hung heavy between them, a silent barrier neither dared to breach. Had they sat down and talked openly about their perspectives, their intentions, their fears, their mistakes, they might have found closure. Instead, they carried their scars silently, reminders of a love that once burned brightly but ultimately succumbed to mistrust and misunderstanding. A final encounter. One rainy evening years later, fate brought them together again. Francis was attending a charity gala hosted by the school district, and Jane happened to be there with one of her affluent suitors. As they locked eyes across the crowded room, time seemed to stand still. Memories flooded back, the laughter, the fights, the lies. For a moment, Jane considered approaching him, but pride held her back. Instead, she watched from afar as Francis mingled effortlessly, surrounded by admirers who hung on his every word. Gone was the insecure young man she once knew. In his place stood someone confident, accomplished, and untouchable. As the night wore on, Francis caught sight of Jane leaving with her date. Watching her walk away, he felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with relief. He realized then that their love had been real, but so had the pain it caused. Letting go had been painful but necessary. It allowed him to grow, to become the person he was today. And as the rain continued to fall outside, washing away the remnants of the evening, both Francis and Jane silently acknowledged that some chapters are better left closed.